Our respected interfaith panel, all who are thought leaders within their faith denominations, Reverend Alan Story, Mrs. Nalini Gangan, Rabbi Dr. Richard Newman, Sheikh Mohammed Ihsan Talib, Mrs. Nozizwe Madlala Routledge, Dr. Abdul Rashid Umar, who embraces the responsibility of the dialogue moderator this evening, in absentia, the Consul General of Indonesia, His Excellency Krishna Adi Putranto and Pak Riyadi Asirdin, and respective spouses, the President of the Muslim Judicial Council, Sheikh Irfan Abrams, and his wife, the Honorable Hafida Fatima Abrams, leadership of the Presidency of the MJC, Sheikh Ibrahim Gabriels, past President of the MJC, and his wife, Mu'alima Aisha, Sheikh Riyad Fatar, and Head of the Imara of the MJC, Sheikh Muhammad Amin Fakir, Board members of IPSA, academic and admin staff, CEO of the Botanical Society of South Africa, Ms. Zaytun Rabbani, leadership of the Habibia Educational Institute, Mr. Royker and Dalby, and spouses, inaugural donors of the Sheikh Yusuf Endowment Waqf Fund, and all new donors, special invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. Assalamu alaikum, Mulweni, Namaste, Shalom, good evening and Goeienaand. My name is Masnoona Kamali. I am privileged to host the responsibility of the Admissions and Records Department at IPSA and also facilitate the dialogue segment of today's program. Assisting me in the formal duties here this evening is Taj Aklika, who is responsible for the strategic relations in the office of the principal at IPSA. It is a humbling honor to share thanks and gratitude to all for scheduling time to attend IPSA's annual fundraising focal feature 2017, the Sheikh Yusuf Scholarship Waqf Fund Dialogue Dinner. Your presence finds solace in the fact that IPSA enjoys strong committed support in its study programs and the ultimate quest of developing and nurturing exemplary leadership in all those alumni who pass through its doors. Without delay, please join me in welcoming the academic head at IPSA, Professor Ibrahim Arnold, to formally welcome all and lead us in prayer.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا مولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. I must say we've got an august attendance here. People that are going to share their experiences in various religions. We've got people that have funded various tables here, mashallah. We say shukran to everybody. And are consistently supporting IPSA. We thank you for your consistent support. And we welcome you all, inshallah. We obviously would like that support to continue. We are here, this is the third IPSA Sheikh Yusuf Scholarship Waqf Banquet. And this is an exciting period that we're going to go through during this afternoon and evening, inshallah. Particularly the dialogue on the ethical role of religion in South Africa. We're looking forward to that because I think if ever we need something to be put forward, today is the day, inshallah, in the period that we are in. So on behalf of our principal, Sheikh Ihsan Talib, and all the academic staff and all the board members, we welcome you and we trust that you will enjoy the whole afternoon and evening in this regard, inshallah. So I would like to then make a dua in welcoming us all and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's assistance. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. الحمد لله القائل ولو دفع الله الناس بعضهم ببعض. Were it not that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala checks one people with the other. لهدمت صوامع وبيع وصلوات ومساجد يذكر فيها اسم الله كثيرا. There would have been demolished monasteries, churches, synagogues and mosques in which the name of Allah is much mentioned. وَلَيَنْصُرَنَّ اللَّهُ مَنْ يَنْصُرُهُ إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَقَوِيٌّ عَزِيزٌ. And Allah will surely support those who support Him. Indeed, Allah is powerful and exalted in might. Salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa alihi wa ashabi. Allahumma aqsim lana min khashyatika ma tahulu bihi baynana wa bayna ma'asik. O Allah, distribute between us the fearfulness, the heedfulness necessary to come between us and committing wrong against you. وَمِن طَاعَتِكَ مَا تُبَلِّغُنَا بِهِ جَنَّتَكَ. And distribute between us the obedience necessary for us to gain admission to your Jannah, to the paradise. وَمِنَ الْيَقِينِ مَا تُهَوِّنُ بِهِ عَلَيْنَا مَصَائِبَ الدُّنْيَا. And distribute between us unswerving faith necessary to minimize for us the tribulations of this world. اللهم اجعل جمعنا هذا جمعا مرحوما وتفرقنا من بعده تفرقا معصوما ولا تجعل فينا شقيا ولا مطرودا ولا محروما برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. Oh Allah, make this gathering a gathering of mercy, and let our separation after this gathering be protected, and do not place amongst us misfortune, repulsion and deprivation, through your mercy, O most merciful of those who show mercy. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Thank you, Professor Ibrahim Arnold, for that beautiful dua and august welcome. On the protocol order is a very special tradition at IBSA. I request the presence of Sheikh Mohammed Ihsan Talib and Sheikh Dawood Blanche to preside over the garland protocols. I will now call up the panelists of the event this evening and give you a brief bio of each of them. Reverend Alan Story. Reverend Alan Story is an ordained minister of the Methodist Church of Southern Africa and is presently ministering at the Central Methodist Church in Cape Town. He is a chairperson of Gun Free South Africa and serves on the Western Cape board of the Right to Know campaign. Reverend Allen has an honours degree in theology and a master's degree in philosophy on applied ethics and economics. He joined the Inclusive and Affirmation Ministries Board in 2011 and since May 2012 serves on its executive committee. Mrs. Nalini Gangan. Mrs. Nalini Gangan is serving as the chairperson of the Hindu Association of the Western Cape and former chairman of the Shiva Alayum Temple in Rylands, Cape Town. Mrs. Gangan is the former acting chairperson for the Western Cape Interfaith Forum and currently serves in a leadership role in the same forum. Rabbi Richard Newman. Rabbi Richard Newman grew up in the progressive movement in Cape Town. He lived in Israel for more than 16 years and has worked in several careers in 3 continents, both secular and Jewish. And after his degrees from Leeds University and UNISA, he has his Shmicha from the Abraham Geiger College in Potsdam, Germany. He has lectured in Yiddish and Hebrew at the University of Denver, Colorado, and holds the Reformed Jewish Educator Award from the CCARA, NATE. As part of the Temple of Israel, Cape Town Progressive Jewish Congregation Rabbinic Team, he handles the caring community work. He has 3 children and numerous grandchildren. Mrs. Nozizwe Rutledge. Mrs. Rutledge has long played a prominent role in South African public affairs. She has a primary diploma and degree qualifications in microbiology and medical laboratory technology from the State Pathology Laboratory Services and Social Sciences and Higher Education from the University of Natal, and also has a B.Sc. Honours Philosophy from the University of Cape Town. She is the recipient of the Tannenbaum Peacemakers Award and was awarded an honorary doctorate by the Haverford College of Pennsylvania. The recipient of the Tannenbaum Peacemakers Award, Dr. Abdul Rashid Omar, has earned his PhD in Religious Studies from the University of Cape Town. He has also completed programs in Islamic Studies, Education and Education in Cape Town, Sudan, Pakistan and Malaysia. He is currently a research scholar on Islamic Studies and Peace Building at the University of Notre Dame, USA. In addition to being a university-based researcher and teacher, he also puts theory to practice and serves as the Imam of the Claremont Main Road Mosque, trustee of the Institute for Healing of Memories, and is a member of the Interfaith Council for Ethics and Education, Arigato International, Japan. And of course, the 6th member of the panel, Principal of IBSA, Sheikh Mohammed Ehsan Talib. Thank you. To commence with the first part of our program this afternoon, it is an honor to request the leadership of our esteemed moderator, Dr. Imam Abdul Rashid Omar, to facilitate our dialogue themed An Ethical Vision for the Role of Religion in South Africa. Let's break the ice with a truly Cape Townian round of applause.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the most compassionate, dispenser of grace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace, mercy and blessings of God be upon you all. Honored guests, respected elders, beloved brothers and sisters, it is my honor to chair and moderate this awesome interfaith session and discussion entitled An Ethical Vision for the Role of Religion in South Africa. The International Peace College South Africa has gathered together a very high-powered and a star-studded interfaith panel to address this very pertinent and critical topic. Our panelists have already been introduced. The format will be as follows. Each of our panelists will be given 10 to 12 minutes to address our dialogue theme, after which we will ask some of the thought leaders in the Muslim community to respond, Sheikh Saadullah Khan, Dr. Nuran Davids and a few others. But without further ado then, please join me in welcoming our first panelist, Reverend Alan Story, and then of course we will move in the order.
And then came the night before they were leaving, and they had a special meal the night before. The mother and father decided to make the family favorite. And as they were serving the meal, the parents said to their 4 children, "Now, we ask you just one thing. While we are away, please relate to each other as if we were here. Behave among yourselves in the way that you behave when we are present around this table. In other words, remember. They left. And for a while, the 4 children remembered how to behave with one another as their parents so desired. But then as time went on, the eldest child began to use more of the resources for himself and his friends than others. And so they stopped having meals together. He would take more of the money, use it sometimes for entertainment, which wasn't budgeted for. The second eldest child, she was a wily kid. She survived sometimes in cahoots with the eldest and sometimes on her own. But the 2 youngest children really suffered. They discovered soon that there wasn't actually enough food for them. No one was helping them with the meals. They had to fend for themselves, and they were too young. And the youngest one, the little girl, she became sick. She became sick. And on top of that, this growing sense of malnourishment. And at some point, we're not quite sure when, she died. And then the parents came back. Well, what do you think the parents said? Where's your little sister? Where's your little sister? No, we don't know where she is. No, but you must know where she is. She's your little sister. No, we don't know where she is. And so they, in a panic, they go and search the hospitals. They do not find her. And finally, they search the morgues and they find her. And they bury her. And then they call the eldest child. And they sit down with the eldest child. And they've got one question for the eldest child. What made you think we loved you more than we loved your little sister? Who gave you the right to use more of the resources on yourself than in providing for your younger sister? Now, I don't know if that story happened that way or not, but I know it's true. God has left us with more than enough resources for the entire human family. Some of us use far more of the resources for ourselves, forgetting that we are family. And so our little sisters and brothers die of starvation without us even knowing when, where, and how. religion, the word means bridge. To bridge, to connect. That's what the word means. Any religion that bridges us together, connects us together, and reminds us that we are family, any religion that does that, reminds us that you and I are sister and brother, is fulfilling that religion. Any religion that breaks the bridge, forms barriers, disconnects us, separates us from one another, pretending that some of us are better than others because we believe certain things that others do not, that religion is failing itself. To the extent that any of our religions remind us that we are family, is to the extent that we must promote them. The ethical vision for religion today, especially in this, the most unequal country in the world, surely needs to be to remind us that we are all family. We can bemoan poverty, we can bemoan inequality in our country and through the world. The source of that poverty, the source of the inequality, is not just public policy, it is the forgetfulness that we are family. Think about it for a second. Some of you have children here. Do you feed one of your children and not the other? Do you clothe the one and not the other? Do you school the one and not the other? If you did, we would report you to the social workers for child abuse, for family abuse. And yet we accept it on a national level. Now here's the sad thing. That religion, mine in particular, in some way has been perverted, that if you believe this way, you will profit and prosper. No, if you believe this way, all should profit and prosper. It's all or none. So let me close by referring to Jesus of Nazareth, who followed rabbinic tradition of summarizing all his teaching in a prayer, as was the custom then. And so his summary of his teaching begins with these words, our Father, our parent. Think about that for a moment. The first word is our, not mine. Our. And so for us to begin to make a difference in our country, we need to begin to learn how to say the word our. Our. That word honors the truth that we are family. And then we know how to be family. We're family all the time. But what we need is an expanded understanding of family. That family does not stop with our surname. Family does not stop in our home. Family does not stop with our skin or with our religion. Family is all-inclusive. All-inclusive. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Namaste. The greeting in Hinduism meaning the divine within me greets the divine within each of you. Ellen is a hard act to follow, but I think that from a in terms of what I will address you on. I think it's important to remember when we're talking about us here in South Africa, how the Hindus came to South Africa, and that many of the Hindus in South Africa today are descendants of the indentured laborers, some 152,000 of them that came between the period 1860 to 1911 to South Africa. And it's important to remember this because despite the fact that these laborers came in conditions akin to slavery, they held on to their religion. In fact, the first temple in Durban was built in 1869. It's a fairly small basic structure, but that was just 9 years after slaves came to South Africa, Indian slaves came to South Africa. But as Hindus, we also have to express our gratitude to those indentured laborers because of their religious conviction that we today in South Africans can still, as a minority, continue to practice our religion. And the second group of Indians that came to South Africa that brought Hinduism with them was obviously the so-called passenger Indians who came to South Africa to explore economic opportunities in South Africa. But Hinduism has faced its fair share of systemic discrimination in South Africa before and during apartheid. In 1869, like I said, the first temple was built, but by 1902 already, there was a move to have legislation to stop the building of Hindu temples. And given this history, because also some of it has to do with where we are today, but also it has to do with Hinduism being seen as synonymous with Indians. But the place we are in South Africa today is not only Indians who are Hindus, but people from various groups. And as we face the tensions in today's world, we find that more and more people are looking to the East and to Hinduism, in particular the issues around meditation, yoga, the Vedic philosophy, vegetarianism and veganism. And so it extends far beyond the Indian community. I think because Hinduism is a religion that is practiced by a small community, many people outside the Hindu religion don't understand what it is, and they have misconceptions about certain things. In Hinduism, there's no fixed doctrine, there's no single scripture. It's diverse, it evolves. And while those things make it attractive to some, it also has its challenges in the current environment we are, where you're practicing a religion as a minority community. And that's more so in Cape Town. I think in Cape Town, when somebody sees an Indian, they assume you're a Muslim. They don't understand the distinction between the two. So from this we can see Hinduism is clearly an enduring culture. It survived British colonialism, it survived apartheid, and it survived the continued onslaught of conversion by missionaries of other faith communities. Hinduism is also mistaken that it promotes that there are many gods. This is not true. The Hindus believe that there's one supreme God who's worshipped, and that supreme God is regarded as the entity that exists in and gives life to all things, and that all creation is part of that supreme energy. And there's lots of philosophical distinctions about whether humans are, their soul is apart from God and needs to go back to God, but in Hinduism it's believed that the soul is part of that creative energy. It is not separate from it. divinity of all life. Now, although sometimes the religion is practiced with a patriarchal tendency, in essence, the Supreme Being is seen as gender neutral, and sometimes it's even depicted as being half male, half female. And I'll come back to the relevance of that. So from the Hindu point of view, our religion is our way of life. You can't separate our faith from the way we live life. The religion is the source of our knowledge, our inspiration, our guidance, and righteous conduct. And no matter how modern a person is, whatever, everything that he does in his life, whether it's his work, what he does in his home, is all part of that faith and part of this way of life. And to come to some concepts, in earlier times, Hinduism was referred to as Sanatana Dharma, which means the eternal way. Sometimes it is in fact now referred to as Hindu Dharma. Now when you just stop at that concept of Dharma, it's a word that does not have a direct English translation, but loosely translated, it means righteous action. So Hinduism sees the purpose of human life as being to achieve liberation from the karmic cycle of birth and death. And the thing, and I think that Alan referred to as well, is that the concept of Dharma looks at human behaviors and acting in a way that prevents chaos, behaviors and action that are necessary for all life in nature, society, family, and the individual level. To just focus on, again, on those, it's not just family, it's the individual, family, society, and nature. So this concept of Dharma is about what your duties are, what your rights are, what your character is, what virtues you possess, and all behavior that you do that is morally upright. From that concept obviously come ethical values, values of truth, non-violence, self-discipline. It's about striving for stability and order, a life that is lawful, harmonious, the striving to do the right thing, to be good, to be virtuous, be helpful to others, and interact successfully with society. So, when one looks at an ancient script called the Maha-Upanishad, one comes to the reference of a concept called Vasudeva Kudumbakam. That's the very concept that Alan referred to. This is the philosophy that sees the whole world as one family. It is a philosophy that tries to foster an understanding that the whole of humanity is one family. It emanates from the spiritual understanding that the whole of humanity is made up of one life energy. The fundamental pillars of this concept are love and harmony, cooperation and mutual support, as in family, community, and nature. It's a concept that can help us to bring unity and support peace. Now there's a direct link between the concept of Dharma, prosperity, and poverty. And again, it links to what Alan was saying. Because when there's prosperity, it's easy for people to follow a moral and lawful life. When there's poverty and distress, everything suffers. Human relations fail. The ability to live the righteous life is difficult. And then there's a vicious cycle that is linked to poverty and prosperity. A land with less moral and lawful life suffers distress, and as the distress rises, it causes more immoral and unlawful life. which further increases distress. Now, in olden times, there was a concept called Raja Dharma, which was the duty of the king, and in modern day terms, I would suppose that would be your government, your ruler, to protect his people, and the belief that to do what is the benefit for the people is of benefit to the king. That's another important concept to remember. So this brings me to where we are in South Africa today. High levels of crime, violence, poverty, violence against women and children, water shortages, religious abuse. There's also all the challenges we face, people's attachment to the material world, modern lifestyle, which is not necessarily moral, and in some cases, an indifference to religion. So what is our duty today? We have a duty to apply our lives to Dharma, which is the right action, which must mean that we must address injustice, as injustice affects the victim specifically, but affects all of us generally. We have to speak in the face of human indignity. We have to ensure that there is righteous rule for the prosperity of all, and we each have to play our part. So the focus of religion going forward is to focus on the individual spiritual development, development of the family unit, and the community and the environment. At the end of a Hindu prayer, there is a mantra that is recited which says, Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. And I want to end on that note. This means, may all beings everywhere be happy and free. And may the thoughts, words, and actions of my own life contribute in some way to that happiness and to the freedom of all. It makes us move from our personal self and radiate a prayer of love for the world around us. It takes us from the egoic and little self and its limited worldview, and it radiates from us global well-being. It's a reminder that we are part of the universe and can positively impact on all creation. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace.
Salam alaikum, shalom, peace to us all. Those words of that tune were sung nearly 4,000 years ago by the high priest in the temple in Jerusalem. And those words have lasted throughout the generations and the centuries. May God bless you and keep you. May God be gracious unto you. May God lift up his face before you and give you peace. And that is the final word that we should all be striving for. Peace. Now, I was honored only a few moments ago to be given this marvelous scarf. I call it a talit. That's what we have in our religion. Because this is from the International Peace College of South Africa. But we don't have to look very far. Because the topic that we are to adhere to this evening is an ethical vision for the role of religion in South Africa. Now, in our synagogues, every week, we read a portion from the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. And we all know that the first one is Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And then it goes on to tell us about someone called Noah. Noah. And I'm sure his name comes up in other religions as well. I had friends, their name was Ibn Nuh, and they were believed to have been descendant from Noah himself. But if we stop for a minute to think and talk about the story of Noah, we know that wonderful tale of how God called upon him because the world and the peoples was evil, was corrupt, was full of bad things going on around. And as God said, I will bring the destruction of all humankind. But you, Mr. Noah, build an ark and put animals in. How many animals? 2 by 2? No. 7 by 7. And if you read the Bible, the King James Version, you'll see that God created 7 by 7 to go into the ark. 2 by 2, some of them, yes. But they were the carnivores, they were the big beasts. So here we have the story, how it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, and water covered the earth. And then Noah opened the window of the ark and sent forth a bird. And the bird returned, for there was no place for it to rest its foot. And he sent him out again, and lo and behold, he came back with an olive branch, a zaytuni. And that was the symbol of peace, the symbol of calm, the symbol of quiet, the symbol that we all hope and pray for. But this episode ends in a very positive note, and in my opinion, a very important note for us here in South Africa in this year of 2017, leading into 2019. I haven't forgotten 2018, that's going to be a good one. And we ask ourselves the question, where can we take from this story of Noah? What lesson can we learn and apply it to our society here in South Africa, an ethical vision for the role of religion in South Africa? Now we believe that Noah was given 7 laws, 7 rules. And this was sealed in the appearance of the rainbow. For as we know, the rainbow, the spectrum, has 7 colors. And this figure of 7, from the 7 days of creation through to a rainbow, later on as well, appears time and time again. So these 7 laws of Noah could, in my opinion, be a guideline to an ethical vision for the role of religion in South Africa. And I think this should be our starting point. We need we were suffered by the flood. We have lost our ethical standpoint. And we have to look again to see where we can start. Where will the new beginning be? And this, I believe, could be based for all of us, no matter what religion we are. And I'm pleased to say, and to be with us, a group of people, because in old days we used to talk about the 3 Abrahamic religions. And I, as a Jew, would get the first word. But this evening I didn't, thank you. But we're all the same. We all have to look together to see how we can start anew in this country. We have gone astray. Now, I don't want to draw any comparisons with the flood of 40 days and the rain of 40 nights. We could do with a few of them here in Cape Town. But let us take this as a sign, a symbol for us to start anew. And let us look at these laws of Noah, the 7 laws which God gave to Noah upon his exiting of the ark. And I'd like to have a little moment to spare on what these 7 laws are, to try and understand how we can apply these to our very existence here in South Africa in this year. The first law is that we must have moral stature, and we must only worship one God. We know there's only one God, that we're agreed upon. We each give him a different name. Some of us give her a different name. But the one God, be it of Islam, be it of Judaism, be it of Christianity, be it of Buddhism, we have one main God. And we must only worship one true God. In addition, we must revere that God with care, and we shall not take the name of God in vain. We should establish courts and pursue justice. There is an ancient part of the Torah which says, Tzedek, Tzedek Tirdof, similar to the Arabic. Tzedek, righteousness shall you pursue. So we are told to establish courts of law and to appoint judges. The judges shall be worthy citizens. They shall be upstanding and upright. And this is what we must do. And I'm pleased to say that in the main, here in South Africa, that is the shining light. So let us establish courts and pursue justice. The 4th doable commandment to Noah was, thou shalt not murder. And tragically, we're far away from that. For only, I heard askance that in Kraaifontein people had been murdered over this weekend, last week. People are murdered day in and day out. There's such terrible, tragic stories of innocent people falling by the hands of the gunmen, falling by the hands of the demonic dealers in drugs and traders of armaments. The 5th law is to maintain a high standard of morality. Be it morality in business practices, be it sexual morality, be it morality in bringing up one's family. This is vital. That family unit is part of our importance on this world living here today. The 6th law is a very easy one to follow. Thou shalt not steal. The 7th law is a little bit more difficult and complex, but we have to understand the practices of the peoples 4,000 years ago. They were prone to tearing off the limbs of animals while they are still alive. And that, by inference, we should show kindness and compassion and understanding to all creatures, to all of God's creators. It was mentioned earlier on that the Lord's Prayer starts, Our Father. Now this is taken from an ancient Aramaic prayer which Jesus was well familiar with. For he started off by, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And this is directly from the Aramaic. And those scholars amongst us will know that Aramaic, Arabic, and Hebrew are all interlinked languages. And the prayer goes like this.
יתקדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, ועולמה דברכיותי וימליך מלכותי, בחיי חון ויום מחון, ובחיי דכל ביתי העולם, ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך, לעולם לעולמי עולמיה יתברך. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתהלל ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו.
And with that prayer, I conclude, and I thank you all.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. Our dear honored moderator, Imam Rashid Umar, our fellow panelists, all present here this evening, our honored and respected leaders in society, beloved fathers and mothers present, brothers and sisters in Islam, I greet you all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and peace and blessings of God Almighty on you all. The motivation for the program here this evening, I would just like to, in my capacity, put some context to that. Our role as faith communities in the future of our country is essential. It is imperative, it's important. We know that religion, as our panelists have indicated, is a bridge, and at other times it causes bloodshed. We believe that God Almighty, in His wisdom, in His infinite wisdom, had sent His revelations, He sent His messengers, and all of it by its own plan for the guidance of mankind. At IBSA, in particular, we have embarked upon the development of research programs for our students. And one of the areas of research that have been identified is the area of interfaith dialogue and peace studies. And we, inshallah, by the grace of Allah, by the grace of God, endeavor to take this platform and take it forward with a view of coming out with pieces of research, publication, that will inform those processes for our students, especially at the postgrad level, as well as how it filters down into the undergrad level. And so the ethical vision for the role of religion in our country is the question which we felt we should get ourselves talking around as people of faith leaders in our community. For we have, I think, a burden of responsibility on our shoulders at this juncture in our history, probably at a higher level than other members of society. Ethical outcomes in the interpretation of scripture is not axiomatic. This sounds peculiar, it sounds ironic. But the 8th century scholar, Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, he stated, the Sharia or Islamic law in its entirety is about wisdom and achieving the welfare or the maslahah of humankind and people in this life and the next. It is based in its entirety on justice, mercy, and goodness. Thus, any ruling or edict that replaces justice with injustice, mercy with its opposite, the common good with corruption, or wisdom with nonsense, can never be part of the Sharia or Islamic law, despite attempts to interpret it like that. In Islamic philosophy, the operationalization of ethics in edicts and conduct are proffered to be guaranteed within the framework of the higher purposes or the maqasid of the Sharia. The stated objectives of God's revelation is guidance for all humanity and establishes the unity of humanity, the human race, to emanate from one single soul. And the soul emanates from God, as we've heard here abundantly this evening. Stated differently, the Quran establishes our humanity as sine qua non, a prerequisite to be recipient of divine guidance. It follows therefore that faith communities should incessantly collaborate to protect the humanity of people. For without humanity, there will be no divine grace. And we have had a discourse that emanated around the Muslim world with this topic called Al-Insaniyya Qabla Al-Tadayyun. Confirming humanity before religiosity. It is telling that Islamic philosophy elevates the preservation of life as one of the foremost purposes of revelation. And there are many references which tonight is not what we want to share. Further to the process of our humanity, God confers each soul human dignity, karama, as a God-given right. Sine qua non to human dignity is the legal and moral prescription of discrimination that erodes human dignity. As a nation and as a community, we know that we still struggle with the remnants of 350 years of oppression based on racial discrimination. The prophetic example to Muslims is too forceful to be overlooked. Hence we find that sometimes we formally eschew racism, yet essentially we are compromised. This is a major objective to be systematically championed in all faith communities. Abject poverty, inequality, joblessness, per prophetic teaching can lead to disbelief. Al-Faqr yu'addi al-Kufr was the adage of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. It is therefore no longer acceptable for welfare operations to overlook the essential need for the restoration of human dignity through poverty alleviation interventions. It is once again telling that not only is the preservation of human dignity per se, but also the preservation of income or livelihood, mal, elevated as one of the higher purposes of the Sharia. And again, is this, let me perhaps reference this particular prophetic teaching because we all know it by heart, yet we recite it in a very narrow fashion, at variance with the teachings of former scholars in our tradition. So we know that, again, the whole requirement of faith, the Prophet, peace be upon him, denied the presence of faith within a person who does not love for his brother or sister that which he loves for himself. And the scholars were at pains to confirm that it is not your brother in faith or sister, but in humanity. So the way we do charity, the way we do welfare, we need to critically introspect. And so to ourselves as a Muslim community, we have found the emergence of a shattering discourse of toxic charity and toxic da'wah, mission work. This has been emerging from among nascent and young Muslim communities in our country. Rectification herein is sometimes non-existent and sometimes painfully slow. However, the recognition for designing ethical interventions that promote human dignity and financial empowerment is gaining somewhat of traction. An important divinely ordained mechanism for social harmony and cohesion is interfaith relations, as well as intra-faith relations. And one of the mechanisms that this engagement hinges on is the acknowledgement and the recognition of the God-ordained principle of free will on this earth. Freedom of choice, freedom of conscience. The Quranic phrase, La ikraha fi din. There is no compulsion in the affairs and the matters of faith. And so, it is intertwined and tied up into the God-given right to human dignity. We have this God-given freedom of conscience which equally allows us to speak our minds, yet never infringe the human dignity of the other. To Muslims, again, the higher purposes of the Sharia guarantees freedom of conscience in the very first degree, Hifdud-Din. Allah lays down His divine law on earth, and Prophet Ibrahim referenced this earlier on when he said that God Almighty, in His law that applies on this existence here in this world, keeps a certain group of people in check by virtue of another group of people. And that, had that not been the case, he says, you would have found the destruction of monasteries and of churches and of synagogues and of mosques wherein the name and the remembrance of God is upheld. Thus the Quran promotes diversity as an innate feature of creation and a cause for reflection on the infinite power of the Creator. Diversity in faith, nations, tribes, cultures, tongues, pigmentation is His design. And faith communities in South Africa find a largely enabling constitutional environment to foster and cultivate these values in society. There are also areas of tension which we have no option but to engage and navigate within an ethical framework with patience, respect, and tolerance. Finally, for religious responses to fulfill an ethical role with integrity, it must of necessity provide solutions that are realistic and relevant to society to address an intellectual and leadership crisis in our community. And so, it has been confirmed and is common cause that faith communities have a vital role to play in political, social, and economic transformation of the country, and in bringing about reconciliation between blacks and whites, between different tribes and different faiths. Religious leaders must have a vision of a humane and just South Africa in which human rights and civil, political, and economic rights are not only enshrined in their constitution, but are observed and practiced in everyday life. I thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Good evening, goeienaand, Sanbonani. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this important interfaith dialogue and colloquium, focusing on defining an ethical vision for the role of religion in South Africa. I'm encouraged to see faith-based individuals and organizations claiming their rightful place in rebuilding a social conscience for our nation, which is rooted in the concept of a shared humanity. In the African context, this shared community is referred to as Ubuntu. I believe this is a global concept of common values which interface our current turbulent world. Faith-based organizations united and took a stand against apartheid. The South African Council of Churches joined the struggle, stimulating the declaration of apartheid as a heresy by the World Council of Churches. The people of faith were acting out their belief and religious doctrine that all people are equal before God. This action by the faith-based community stimulated global action and solidarity in support of the South African liberation struggle, which included cultural boycotts and economic sanctions. The interfaith approach to our social issues arose and was strengthened during the years of struggle. The fact that it has survived to this day indicates its importance in ensuring our country remains true to the foundations of our constitutional democracy, informed by a collective national moral compass. The aim of this colloquium is about sharing our thinking about issues of ethics and morality. In this regard, I wish to share from my Quaker and African philosophy roots. I was raised a Christian in an African home where my grandmother had initially abandoned African traditional beliefs after her conversion by the Free Methodist Church missionaries. I later became a communist and questioned the role of religion, which we regarded as the opium of the poor. At university, I was drawn to philosophy, the study of knowledge, or thinking about thinking, which gave me the analytical tools I needed to analyze and understand the world. One of the questions I delved into was, does God exist? Which led me to the famous quote, "I think, therefore I am," by French philosopher René Descartes. Somebody this week on television contrasted this way of looking at the world, "I think, therefore I am," with the African expression of "I am because we are." While I was searching for answers about God, I came across Quakers and started going to meetings, first as an attender and later joined to become a full member. I was attracted to the non-hierarchical structure and the belief that God speaks through all of us and that we must respond to that of God in others. Quakers are members of the Religious Society of Friends, a faith that emerged as a new Christian denomination in England during a period of religious turmoil in the mid-1600s and is practiced today in a variety of forms around the world. Even so, there are more Quakers in Africa than anywhere in the world. To members of our faith, the words Quaker and friend mean the same thing. Quakers draw on our traditional testimonies of peace and non-violence, social equality, integrity, and simplicity, which developed during and through actions of those who went before, and which we interpret and express in ways we act today. Quakers believe in an active, involved, faith-based community living in a modern world. I was particularly drawn to Quaker rejection of violence and war, especially at a time in our country when others in the liberation movement were arguing in favor of a just war. Quakers believe that violence breeds violence and therefore reject all wars and preparation for war. So when I was appointed Deputy Minister of Defense, There was much discussion about whether a Quaker could lead a military institution. In my own mind, there was no contradiction, as it gave me an opportunity to apply my Quaker values. I found the concept of human security a dynamic and practical policy framework for addressing widespread and cross-cutting threats facing governments and people. Recognizing that threats to human security vary considerably across and within countries and at different points in time, the application of human security calls for an assessment of human insecurities that is people-centered, comprehensive, context-specific, and preventive. We heard just now about poverty and how that breeds violence and hopelessness, and this is what we must address. Our country doesn't face any external enemies. Such an approach helps focus attention on current and emerging threats to the security and well-being of individuals and communities. Furthermore, by identifying the concrete needs of populations under stress, human security directly and positively affects the daily lives of people threatened in their survival, livelihood, and dignity. While in the Ministry of Defense, I co-wrote an article on developmental peacekeeping, an approach to peacekeeping that seeks to address the economic causes of violent conflict. This approach centers on dismantling the war economy, and I think until we have done that, we will not know peace, and the cycle of violence will continue. Quakerism has a long genealogy of concern, thought, and action with regard to economics. Our spiritual traditions teach us that in right relationship, we touch the fullness of human meaning and the presence of the divine. As we consider an ethical vision of the role of religion in South Africa, we must address the issue of economic injustice and what can be done about it. The vision we develop must insist on a fair distribution of our shared resources so as to achieve the greater common good. Quakers believe a peace testimony that does not address economics in a major and sustained way is not a fully developed or spiritually accountable witness. In line with the concept of the greater common good, the Quaker peace testimony, economics, and the common good is about elevating areas of human policy and practice into this zone of right relationship. Because economic behavior is so often excluded by policy from the zone of right relationship, it is a primary area of injustice, conflict, violence, and war. In this context, we need to make a distinction between the economics of resource competition and the economics of the common good. I think this is exactly the story that Alan told us right at the beginning, and I've so enjoyed this evening, particularly the storytelling and the music. It's so African. So the economics of resource competition leads to resource wars, social disintegration, and ecological degradation. The latter has the potential of creating cultures of peace, social cooperation, and ecological resilience. So like my sister from the Hindu faith, I really believe that we cannot go forward without us looking at all the creation around us and living in harmony with our creation. And even as I stand here in front of these majestic trees behind me that are 300 years old, I feel that groundedness in the earth, and this is what we must protect. Quakerism has a long, of course, I've done that. And I've got 2 minutes, so I've got to move fast. So I can share this longer version of my talk because I really wanted us to follow through with the peace testimony, which, as I related, is a Quaker testimony, but I think it's all our testimony. I've heard it said right through by the panel that we can't allow others to die in the presence of so much wealth in our country. So as I rush forward and going towards ending, I want to bring you to where I am right now in terms of my work. But before I do that, I want to remind you of our father, Nelson Mandela, when he spoke at the University of Cape Town in 2004. And he appealed to all of us to remember the RDP of the soul. And he said, and I quote, "The values of human solidarity that once drove our quest for a humane society seem to have been replaced or are threatened by crass materialism and pursuit of social goals of instant gratifications," unquote. He said one of the challenges facing the country was to instill in the consciousness of the people a sense of solidarity, of being in the world for one another. Again, this talks about us belonging to the same family. I wish to end my talk by bringing up two related issues that I'm now involved in, and which most people, including people of faith, are reluctant to address. These are men's violence against women, and in particular the prostitution system, which objectifies women and undermines their right to dignity and bodily integrity. Why do I call it men's violence? Listen to the following sequence of sentences taken from Jackson Cart's work on masculinity. And I quote, "John hit Mary. It is clear John is the subject. Mary was hit by John. John is now at the end of the sentence. Mary was abused. Mary is now the subject, and John has disappeared. Mary is an abused woman. Abused has now become Mary's identity." Calling it men's violence puts men back at the subject and at the place where responsibility must lie. My call to the faith community is to prioritize men's violence against women, gender inequality, and ending patriarchy, both within our faith communities and society in general. Our organization, Embrace Dignity, and I've heard a lot today about dignity. That's the name of our organization. Embrace Dignity seeks to address the objectification and institutional violence of the prostitution system by advocating for law reform. The issue has now come to a head following the release of the South African Law Reform Commission on adult prostitution. There are essentially three approaches for the law on prostitution that are implemented around the world. And very briefly, these three are allowing prostitution by decriminalizing or legalizing the system of prostitution and recognize those involved as workers. The so-called sex work approach that is applied in New Zealand and certain states in Australia, referred to as decriminalization, and in the Netherlands, Germany, and Denmark, referred to as legalization or regulation. The second approach is a prohibitionist approach that criminalizes all aspects of prostitution. And this is what is in place here in South Africa, basically taking the victims of poverty, of violence against women, and re-victimizing them. The third approach that I want to mention quickly is called the abolitionist approach. And this is an approach that is emerging around the world, where those who are selling sex because of vulnerability are decriminalized, but those who exploit the vulnerability, the buyers, the pimps, the brothel owners, are criminalized. And this is the only effective way as far as we are concerned. And just very finally, I would like you to participate in this process that has opened with the Minister of Justice having released the South African Reform Report on adult prostitution. We're calling on the faith community to recognize the issue of prostitution as a social justice issue of our time. And even as we talk about the ethics, the vision of ethics that is led by our religion, it is important for us to take into account this issue. As we seek to establish an ethical vision for the role of religion in South Africa, let us declare for ourselves and for the world to know that our country cannot be fully emancipated while the prostitution system continues to exploit women and girls, rendered vulnerable by poverty, unemployment, and patriarchy. Let us end it now.
Wow. Allow me, on behalf of all of us, to thank this distinguished panel for their thought-provoking inputs. We are indeed grateful for you sacrificing your time and for your commitment to interfaith dialogue. This has been a wonderful demonstration and illustration of a precious gift that we have in South Africa that we sometimes too often take for granted. The great interfaith solidarity and commitment that we have as a legacy in Cape Town. May we never take it for granted, may we build on it and always note it as a very special gift that we have in our country. I now would like to call upon some of our Muslim thought leaders to respond. There is a mic out there, so I will just ask Sheikh Saadullah Khan if he would like to give us a short response. I'm so sorry, I have a terrible job of having to cut off people, but we have a time constraint, so Sheikh Saadullah, I'm giving you 2 minutes.
Assalamu alaikum. I'll speak faster than usual. First of all, I think it's a tremendous honor to be in this august place, specifically with the kaleidoscope of botanical realities outside. And we find that here we have a bouquet of flowers from the garden of the Almighty, expressing views and wisdom from the scriptures. May the Almighty bless all of you. We reflect upon what was said by the Reverend about the oldest child and the abuse at the expense of other people. And of course about family and caring, about our common humanity, and about religion being a bridge. There was reference by Nalini Gangin about selflessness to global consciousness. There was reference by Rabbi Newman about the search for peace and the 7 laws of Noah and means and ways whereby we can regain our ethical standards. And of course, Sheikh Hassan Talib made reference to the ethical outcomes of scripture and the higher objectives of Sharia, making reference to justice, wisdom, restoration of human rights and human dignity, affirming the golden rule which is common to all of us, which is loving for humanity what we love for ourselves. If I may lecture to what Rabbi's tradition there, it was Hillel who said, that is the whole of the law, the rest is only commentary. It's important for us to remember that, because all faith traditions share that in common, the idea of loving for others what you love for yourself. And we find in the book of Mark, where Jesus said, the greatest of all commandments is love for your neighbor. Love your Lord with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind, and love thy neighbor as yourself. And as Sheikh Hassan referred to what the Prophet said, أفضل الإيمان أن تحب للناس ما تحب لنفسك. The highest expression of our humanity and of our faith is to love others what we love for ourselves. And Dr. Nonizwe made reference to I am because we are, and about the issues of addressing issues of economic injustice, of gender dignity, and living in harmony with creation as a whole. I think one of the important elements maybe was not mentioned, but nonetheless overarching, perhaps that's the bridge, is the notion of Ubuntu, the idea of caring and working in ways that brings about the goodwill for all our countrymen. And perhaps once again in the crisis we face, the economic crisis, the political crisis, crisis of corruption, of crisis of conscience, I think people of faith have the ethical responsibility, because people of faith are supposed to be people of conscience, to rise up once again as we rose in apartheid time against leaders who were imposed upon us, but now to rise against leaders whom we've elected, but who have deviated from the path of justice and economic goodwill of the people. So I call upon all of us to perhaps circumscribe our attempts at coming together with the spirit of Ubuntu. Thank you very much.
Shukran Kathiran, Sheikh Saadullah. I now ask Dr. Nuran Davids if she would like to do a brief response. Again, it's 2 minutes.
Shukran, no pleasure.
Assalamu alaikum to everybody. It's a difficult job. The respondent's job is normally to take issue with what the panel has to say. And I think I don't have any issues, Sheikh Tawib, so you'll be very happy to hear that. I think the overwhelming message has been confirmed that when we talk about faith communities, that collectively we speak about peace and coexistence. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. And it's all good and well to say these things on these platforms, but the question that begs to be asked, if that is the message, then why are we not coexisting in peace? And so perhaps my role should be to pose those questions to my own community first, as a Muslim woman, and as somebody living in South Africa. And I wish to pick up on something that Rabbi Newman said, in that if Judaism had the first word, and Islam purports to have the last word, and the Nabi Muhammad ﷺ is the final messenger, then what indeed is our message? What legacy do we leave behind if we claim to have the final word, if we are the seal of all those faiths? And so the challenge to us, and I speak to Muslims first, is an immense challenge, because we lay claim to these identities, but I think to a very large extent our claim to being Muslim has almost been stagnated in confessional ideas. So we say, I am Muslim, and this is my name, and this is what I believe, and I pray 5 times a day, but we pay very little attention to the fact that to be Muslim is to act ethically. And so perhaps the emphasis should be less on our attachment to this word Muslim, and more on an attachment to what it means to be human. Because very often I become concerned about our preoccupation with rituals and routines and practices when we have lost regard for the human in the other. And so that is my response to you, and I've said it in my time. Shukran.
We are left with 3 minutes because we scheduled this in at 7. So I'm going to give 1 minute to the following 3 people that I have here. Tasneem Adams is here, Zakira Desai, and Mahmoud Sangle. If you can prepare 1 minute. Is Tasneem is here? No. Okay, then we go to Zakira Desai. And then Mahmoud Sangle, and maybe I can ask Professor Aslam Fatah, you can take that announcement.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm from the Voice of the Cape Radio. I have to say that while this is quite a positive move, I don't think that it's in any way negative. But I do, however, have to say that the discussion was quite romantic. In practical terms, some of the points that were raised did not necessarily speak to the practical ways we can go forward in terms of solutions that the religious community can serve in terms of socio-economic development, political issues that we face currently. So the principles that we tabled, it was universal, one thing, and secondly, it was not necessarily that profound in terms of how we can practically assist our communities. And secondly, if I may ask a question, very recently, as recently as I think Wednesday, I was speaking to someone about the issues that we face in the Cape in terms of gang violence, in terms of rape. And this person made a comment, and the comment was that our communities have lost God. Is this an oversimplification of a problem? And how are our religious leaders trying to transform thinking in terms of judgment when things like this, when things such as this do occur within our communities?
Okay, that was a particular challenge, so I'm getting my panelists just to think about that. But Professor Aslam Fatah, if you can take that one.
Shukran. Assalamu alaikum. 1.5 minutes, please. I want to continue on the lines of the previous speaker, Professor Nuran Davids and so on. And I want to say that I want to identify a sociological problem. A sociological problem is a feature of the kind of life that we currently live. And I want to suggest to the panel, and maybe afterwards you can talk about it, that we live in times of enormous human complexity. Material complexity, intellectual complexity, and so on, and confusion. That's my first point. My second point is that it is very difficult to recognize the human in the ethical in this confusion and complexity. And all human communities, religious communities included, third point, contributes to this confusion. Because we tend, in times of human confusion, to proliferate in terms of our doctrinal disputations. Because doctrinal disputations are a stand-in and a soothing balm for dealing with the confusions that we are not dealing with. An ethical stance, my final point, Imam Rashid Umar, is that human communities ought to have a kind of rigorous dialogue and a set of practices and a set of respectful stances towards the inclusion of our ever-evolving human complexity that allows us to recognize each other. The word in Arabic is called ta'aruf. Ta'aruf is a precondition for living an ethical life. Alhamdulillah.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Mahmoud Sanjay from the Muslim News to, 1 minute as Mahmoud, and then I'm going to ask all of the panelists for 30 seconds to have short responses, excluding the principle of IPSA. Is that terrible?
Assalamu alaikum. I also want to take up a point that the previous speaker had made about ethics. As a media person, we are constantly concerned about ethics, and I'm interested in the convergence between ethics of religious people and the ethics of the media. And it's one particular aspect of ethics that, as media persons, we're always concerned about, and that is the public interest. Masalih al-Mursala, as the scholars should be familiar with. And I do think that from our side, we would appeal to religious leaders to consider ethics from a slightly different perspective. And there's one small strand of it that I want to emphasize, and that is disclosure. To feel comfortable talking to media about what happens inside and outside of the church, of the masjid, the synagogue, and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you. I think there's always going to be a temptation in religion to begin to worship one's own religion. Let me say that again. There's a temptation in all religions to end up worshipping their religion, to worship the way I worship. And so our religion can become idolatrous. The moment our religion stops focusing on the dignity of humanity, on anything else, then we have, in my opinion, become idolatrous. And the moment a religion begins to exist for itself, it dies and it causes death. That's the same as it happens to individuals. If I live for myself, I will die and cause death. It's the same for political parties that exist for themselves. They will die and cause death. And then finally, what I would say is, it may be romantic. We've got 10 minutes here. But there's nothing romantic about doing family. Family is hard work. But we know what is at stake. Fairness. We know that if you want peace in your family, there has to be fairness. Children are hypersensitive to fairness. And so, if we are going to move forward to a country of healing, we're going to need to prioritize the most vulnerable in our society. And that should be the basis of all our policy decisions. What benefits the most vulnerable? Because if the most vulnerable are not protected, none of us are protected.
Okay. Practicalities, I think, is important. I think the important thing coming from this is that everything begins with each one of us. What we do in our homes, what we teach our sons about our daughters and their mothers and their sisters, how we treat our wives in front of our children. All of those things happens, and each one of us has that responsibility in our homes, because that transcends to community, to society, and beyond. But as religious leaders, we also have that responsibility. And Alan and I both serve on the Western Cape Religious Leaders Forum. And for the last 2 years, we have been debating these issues, and it has caused quite a lot of disruption in terms of what our responsibility is in society. And so I want to say that we've come to the conclusion that we need to be out there, we need to be visible when there is injustice. And I would encourage everyone that knows of the things that are happening to join us as religious leaders and make our stand, because we can do that little bit.
Bravo. What wonderful words we've heard this evening. Now what? I'll pause for 3 seconds. Because now is our chance to establish a small group of people to get up and go and demand justice and demand the right things based on our common humanity. Put the word religion aside. Our common humankind. That's what we are. So let us all get up and say to each other, Salam. Peace be to you. Shalom. But before we go home this evening, let us commit ourselves to a program of action. We need to do things. The time for talking has come to an end. So let us, through the auspices of IPSA Vision 2020, the International Peace College for South Africa, let us get together a small group of people and do. Thank you.
To the Voice of the Cape, I think romance is good. We need to start at a point where we recognize our humanity. I think it's a good starting point, our common humanity. Like Paulo Freire says, we need to look at theory and practice at the same time for us to be able to bring about sustainable change. Thank you.
Wow, what an intellectual feast. I hope that we have developed our real appetite for the food which is following. So it is just in conclusion, my earnest prayer and dua, because we have to have a prayer, that this interfaith solidarity that we've witnessed continues to flourish and to grow in our city and in our country and in the world. Shukran kathiran wa jazakumullahu khairan. Thank you for your patience with me, and barakallahu feekum. May God bless all of you. Thank you.
Shukran, and thank you to Dr. Rashid Umar for a wonderful coordination of the program. And thank you to all the panelists for the sublime and excellent presentations. We ask everyone to be informed that the Maghrib Salah will be performed under the open sky in the court.